Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Let's be honest, Voldemort is the main villain of the entire Harry Potter saga. He is the embodiment of evil, a name feared even in whispers. But if we set aside fear and take a closer look at his actions, we'll see that his plans were often far from brilliant. In fact, they sometimes bordered on outright absurdity. Today, let's explore these contradictions, without fear, but with a touch of irony. Enjoy the video. Number 1, his careless attitude toward horcruxes. Let's start with the most paradoxical point. Voldemort, who did everything possible to achieve immortality, showed a baffling carelessness when it came to his horcruxes. The idea itself was genius. Split the soul, hide the pieces, and become invincible. But what did the Dark Lord actually do? Instead of hiding them in remote, desolate places, he used famous artifacts: Slytherin's locket, Hufflepuff's cup, Ravenclaw's diadem, and then he placed them in the safest places he could think of, like a school and a bank. Why not toss one into the ocean, another into the desert, and the third into lava? Or even better, make them out of plain, unremarkable objects. The harder they are to find, the longer you stay alive. But alas, for Voldemort, theatrics mattered more than effectiveness. Number 2. The purity obsession of a half-blood. How could Voldemort, being a half-blood himself, build an ideology around the superiority of pure blood? It's not just ironic, it's absurd. His mother was a witch, his father a Muggle, and yet he fanatically promoted blood purity and led the Death Eaters, many of whom blindly followed this belief. How did he reconcile this within himself? Did he think he was an exception? Or did he lie so convincingly that he began to believe it himself? Hard to say, but a fanatic who denies his own nature isn't just contradictory, it's a tragicomic farce on a national scale. Number 3. Why didn't Voldemort possess someone else? In the first book, the Dark Lord inhabited Professor Quirrell's body. It wasn't ideal, but at least it allowed him to act. So why didn't he use the same trick again? Why not possess one of the Death Eaters? Or dominate a random wizard? What stopped him from doing this repeatedly until he regained a full body? After Quirrell's death, his ghostly essence simply vanishes from the story until Goblet of Fire. Where was he? How did he survive? Why didn't he use the proven method again? No answers. The plot moved on and logic was left behind. Number 4, the unbreakable vow. In the magical world, there's a perfect way to ensure loyalty, the unbreakable vow. Break it, and you die. Simple. So why didn't Voldemort make all his Death Eaters swear one? Why not demand a magical oath of loyalty from everyone who joined his cause? Did he think fear was a better motivator? Or didn't want to share magical responsibility? In the end, this forced trust backfired. Snape turned out to be a double agent, Peter a coward, Lucius a failure. The unbreakable vow might have saved the Dark Lord from such loyalty. Number 5, the overcomplicated plan in Goblet of Fire. Now here's where Voldemort showed his flair for drama. Instead of simply getting Harry's blood through Barty Crouch Jr., who had access to him all year, he orchestrated an entire tournament. Portal, multiple tasks, manipulations, all to lure a teenager to a graveyard. Barty could have taken Harry's blood any time, a bite, a scratch, a spell. But no, there had to be a show. And what if Harry had lost or died during the second task? The whole plan would have collapsed. So much effort for a highly risky payoff. And this was supposed to be Voldemort's grand return. Number 6, what was Voldemort even doing? One question haunts fans. What was Voldemort actually doing between books? After Philosopher's Stone, he vanishes for nearly 3 years. Where did he go? Why didn't he try to inhabit someone again? What was he doing while Harry grew up? And then again, in Order of the Phoenix and Half-Blood Prince, he's suddenly off the radar as if the great villain was on vacation. His plans seem to operate on a one-move-per-year schedule. Kill Harry, take over the Ministry, hide a horcrux, as if multitasking wasn't an option. Number 7, end-of-year attack pattern. You can't help but smirk at how Voldemort always shows up near the end of the school year. September? Never. Christmas? Not a chance. Only the grand finale. Sure, you could joke that he respected the academic calendar, but seriously, this predictability made him vulnerable. It's like a thief who only robs on Friday nights. If he had attacked unexpectedly, say, in September, things might have gone very differently. But no, the Dark Lord seemed bound to some inner script, and once again, he failed. Number 8, making Nagini a horcrux. Nagini slithered beside him like a shadow, a constant companion. But Voldemort didn't just keep her close, he made her a horcrux, a living creature, a ticking clock. Unlike a locket or a goblet, Nagini could bleed, could die. Nagini, he whispered again and again, even feeding her victims. In Deathly Hallows, she strikes from under Bathilda Bagshot's skin, a trap Voldemort sets with pride. But he forgets something vital. Creatures are not vaults. They move, they breathe, they make mistakes. And when Neville Longbottom sliced her head from her body, the last piece of Voldemort's soul screamed into silence. Why didn't he hide her, protect her? She was the last horcrux, the final thread tying him to this world. And yet he marched her into battle, through Hogwarts, past wands and spells and fire. The snake is the last horcrux, Harry tells Ron and Hermione in the forest, and they understand what's at stake. But Voldemort doesn't. He sees Nagini as untouchable. She's not. She's mortal, just like him. And in the end, it was her death, so public, so brutal, that made him fully human again, just in time to die. Number 9, disrespecting his own followers. Lucius Malfoy once stood proud at Voldemort's side, wealthy, respected, powerful, but after failing to retrieve the prophecy in Order of the Phoenix, he returned home in disgrace. Voldemort didn't offer forgiveness, he offered silence. Cold, merciless silence. In Half-Blood Prince, Lucius is absent, locked in Azkaban, while his home becomes a prison and his wife trembles under Voldemort's gaze. "You dare speak to me!" Voldemort hisses at Bellatrix, once his most loyal. Even she isn't safe. Loyalty doesn't matter to him, only fear, and fear never lasts forever. When Voldemort demanded blind obedience, he bred betrayal. Wormtail was terrified of him, and yet he helped Harry escape in Goblet of Fire. Snape was his most faithful, yet worked for Dumbledore all along. Even Narcissa Malfoy in the final battle lied to his face to protect her son. "Is Draco alive?" she whispered to Harry, and when he said yes, she declared him dead. That lie shattered Voldemort's victory. These weren't betrayals born of courage, they were survival, the kind that grows in the shadow of a tyrant who treats allies like insects. Voldemort ruled through fear, and fear always cracks. Number 10. Misreading the prophecy. The prophecy said the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies. 2 boys fit, Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom, both born in July, both to parents who defied Voldemort 3 times. But Voldemort chose Harry. Why? Because Harry, like him, was a half-blood. He chose the boy who was most like himself, Dumbledore later explained. Not because it was wiser, but because it was personal. Voldemort saw himself in Harry and wanted that reflection destroyed. He never even considered Neville, never sent a spy, never tested the other path, and that mistake would follow him to his grave. What he never understood was this: the prophecy wasn't fate, it was fuel. It only had power because Voldemort gave it power. And either must die at the hand of the other, it said, but only because he tried to kill a baby. That attack created the bond, made Harry the chosen one. If Voldemort had done nothing, Harry would have been just another boy in Godric's Hollow. No scar, no fame, no destiny. Voldemort, in trying to prevent the prophecy, fulfilled it. In fearing a threat, he forged it. Number 11, the foolish attack on Hogwarts. Voldemort could have waited. He had the ministry. He controlled the press, the laws, the fear. But instead of tightening his grip and starving the resistance slowly, He marched on Hogwarts like a man throwing dice in a storm. He brought giants, spiders, and Death Eaters to the gates of a castle filled with skilled witches, ancient magic, and students willing to fight. In Deathly Hallows, Professor McGonagall led enchanted suits of armor into battle. Flitwick cast shield charms across the sky. Even centaurs and house elves joined the defense. This wasn't just a school, it was a fortress, and Voldemort walked straight into it. His strategy was pride, not planning. He broadcast his voice over the grounds. "Give me Harry Potter," he said, "and none shall be harmed." But they didn't surrender, they fought. Neville stood before him, bloodied but unbroken. Molly Weasley took down Bellatrix. Even when Harry appeared, Voldemort underestimated him, dueling in front of everyone as if the moment was theatre. And when it ended, when Voldemort fell, it was because he'd gambled everything on one last charge. No escape plan, no fallback, just the belief that fear alone could win a war. It didn't. Number 12, turning a blind eye to Harry's connection. At the graveyard in Goblet of Fire, Voldemort stood reborn, wand in hand, eager to prove he was stronger than ever. But when he duelled Harry, something strange happened. Their wands locked in a golden thread, priori incantatem. It wasn't just unusual, it was rare, ancient magic. "We cannot fight each other," Ollivander had warned. "The wands share the same core." But Voldemort, furious and arrogant, brushed it off. He never paused to ask why fate, wand law, and death itself kept tying him to this one boy. He called it chance. It was a mistake. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry's dreams were no longer just dreams. He saw into Voldemort's mind. He felt his anger, his triumphs, even his pain. When Arthur Weasley was attacked, Harry witnessed it in real time, through the snake's eyes. Dumbledore knew, Snape knew, everyone knew there was a link, everyone except the one person who should have cared the most, Voldemort. He noticed the connection, yes, but he never explored it, never questioned what it meant. He simply tried to block Harry out, slamming doors in a mind he didn't understand. "The boy's mind is weak," he said. "The connection is nothing." He was wrong. That link was everything. It was the reason Harry could see his thoughts, feel his fear, sense his moves. It was the crack in Voldemort's armor. If he had studied it, controlled it, he might have used it to destroy Harry from the inside. But Voldemort didn't study things he feared. He ignored them, denied them. That's what made him blind. He called himself the greatest wizard alive, but he never took the time to understand the one thing that made his enemy truly dangerous. His own soul, scattered and unguarded, lived inside the boy he kept trying to kill, and he never saw it coming. Number 13, ignoring Dumbledore until it was too late. Voldemort feared no one, or at least that's what he told himself. But deep down there was one name he didn't say lightly, Albus Dumbledore. The only wizard he ever admitted was a match for me. And yet he did almost nothing to remove him from the game. Years went by and Dumbledore stayed untouched, commanding respect, gathering allies, training Harry. Voldemort attacked the Ministry Hogwarts, even Muggleborns in hiding. But Dumbledore, untouched. Why? Because Voldemort didn't just fear his power, he feared what he couldn't understand. In Half-Blood Prince, Voldemort finally makes a move. But he doesn't send Bellatrix, he doesn't send Snape. He chooses Draco Malfoy, a 16-year-old boy. Draco's been given a task, Snape tells Bellatrix in a dark, quiet room. The task is murder. The target is Dumbledore. Even Bellatrix is stunned. Voldemort sends a child to kill the most dangerous wizard alive. Why? To punish Lucius? To test Snape? Or just to avoid doing the job himself? Either way, it's a gamble. And Dumbledore, as always, sees the whole picture before anyone else. Dumbledore doesn't run. He prepares, he strengthens the order, secures Harry's protection, and even arranges his own death on his own terms. In Deathly Hallows, Snape reveals the truth. Dumbledore told me to do it, he planned it all. Voldemort never knew, never even suspected. That's the cost of arrogance. While Voldemort played with shadows, Dumbledore played with the truth, and the truth won. By ignoring Dumbledore, Voldemort gave him time to teach, time to plan, time to shape Harry into the one person who could beat him. A smarter enemy would have struck first. Voldemort waited, and in that waiting he lost the only chance he had to cut the head off the resistance. Dumbledore didn't survive by hiding. He survived because Voldemort made the mistake of thinking the war was already his. Number 14. Failing to build stable alliances. Voldemort never knew how to build loyalty. He didn't offer partnership, he offered fear. Take the giants, for example, powerful, terrifying, ancient beings. When Hagrid and Madame Maxime were sent to parley with them in Order of the Phoenix, they arrived too late. Voldemort's followers had already gotten there. "They've been visiting the giants," Hagrid told Harry, "trying to get them on their side." But it wasn't diplomacy. It was threats, intimidation, and empty promises. Within weeks, the giants turned on each other. By the time Voldemort wanted them ready for war, most were either dead or hiding. His idea of an alliance had destroyed what could have been a true weapon. He did the same with the werewolves. Instead of offering them a place in his new world, he gave Fenrir Greyback a taste of chaos. Greyback, a savage monster, wasn't interested in loyalty, only in blood. Voldemort used him to terrorize families and threaten enemies, but never truly brought him into the fold. Remus Lupin, a werewolf himself, once said, "They think they'll be left to hunt freely, but Voldemort hates their kind too. Voldemort wanted tools, not allies, and when you treat dangerous beings like weapons, they either turn on you or vanish when you need them most." Even among his own followers, the pattern was clear. He used fear to control, never trust. He never made an effort to bond with intelligent magical creatures, centaurs, merpeople, goblins, creatures with their own systems, beliefs, and powers, creatures who might have joined his cause if approached with respect. But Voldemort didn't understand respect. He demanded obedience. When the goblins refused to side with him, he took over Gringotts by force. He never considered that perhaps mutual benefit works better than violence. In the end, Voldemort's alliances were made of glass. They looked solid, but shattered under pressure. The giants were gone, the werewolves were unorganized, the trolls easily beaten. And when it came time for the final battle at Hogwarts, who stood with him? A handful of Death Eaters and a snake, because no matter how many creatures Voldemort used, he never convinced a single one to believe in him. Number 15. The unnecessary murder of Lily Potter. Of all the choices Lord Voldemort made in his long and winding descent into darkness, one stands above the rest as a staggering contradiction to his own instincts for survival. The decision to kill Lily Potter. That night in Godric's Hollow was meant to be a clean execution, a surgical strike against a child marked by prophecy. James Potter was an obstacle, easily dispatched. But Lily? She was not armed, she did not fight, she pleaded, and her death, unnecessary by every magical standard, unleashed a magic the Dark Lord had never believed in, the kind of magic born not from wands but from choice. And it broke him. It was not strategy that compelled Voldemort to murder Lily Evans Potter, nor was it necessity. The prophecy made no mention of the mother. It spoke only of the child born as the 7th month dies, the one with power the Dark Lord knows not. That power, as Albus Dumbledore would later explain, was love, and Voldemort, shaped by the orphanage and hardened by power, could neither understand nor respect it. But logic does not require emotion, it demands efficiency. If Voldemort truly sought to preserve his strength and eliminate only the prophesied threat, then Lily was irrelevant. Her death was not tactical, it was a mistake. Snape, of all people, begged for Lily's life. "You disgust me," Dumbledore had told him, when the former Death Eater revealed the source of his horror. Not remorse for the Potter's murder, but for the death of the woman he had loved. And even Voldemort, it seems, had agreed to spare her. Not out of mercy, but because Severus Snape had asked. "Stand aside, girl," he said to her, not once, but twice. He did not need her blood, he wanted her gone, and yet, when she refused to leave her child, when she chose to die in Harry's stead, he killed her anyway. That choice, careless, cruel, pointless, set into motion the very magic that rebounded his killing curse and shattered his body. Why didn't Voldemort simply push her aside? He was capable of stunning spells, of incarcerus, of obliviate. He was the most powerful dark wizard of the age, and yet in that final moment he defaulted to murder. It was not necessity, it was ego, the same ego that led him to dismiss house elves, to underestimate the loyalty of Dobby, to ignore the complexities of wand law and misjudge the Elder Wand. He saw Lily not as a person, but as a distraction, and Voldemort had no patience for distractions. If she stood in the way, she would die. But the irony lies deeper. For a man who carved his soul into 7, who avoided death at all costs, who feared nothing more than his own mortality, he casually created the one thing he could never defeat. Lily's death was not only unnecessary, it was disastrous. Her willing sacrifice, the ancient, primal magic that he, in his arrogance, ignored, became Harry's shield. "Love as powerful as your mother's for you leaves its own mark," Dumbledore told Harry. "To have been loved so deeply, even though the person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever." Voldemort had never known love, and in underestimating it, he sealed his own doom. There is no version of events in which Lily Potter posed a threat to him. She was unarmed, wandless, and cornered. She begged, she did not resist. And if Voldemort truly meant to spare her, even as a token of Snape's loyalty, then killing her was more than senseless, it was self-sabotage. For a man obsessed with immortality, he handed Death an invitation on a silver platter. And Death, waiting just behind the veil, accepted. The books never suggest that Voldemort even hesitated. Not Harry, please not Harry," Lily begged. "Stand aside, you silly girls, stand aside now," Voldemort answered, and then she was gone. It is worth noting that this was the only time in the entire series that Voldemort granted such a reprieve. He offered no one else a chance to live, not the Longbottoms, not the Auras, not even other Death Eaters who disappointed him. That he did so for Lily only to snatch it back exposes a flaw, and not in his power, but in his understanding of consequences. When Lily chose to die for her son, she invoked an old magic, older than Hogwarts, older than the Founders, a sacrificial protection that rendered Harry untouchable by the Dark Lord. That Voldemort walked into that house unaware of such magic is telling, but that he triggered it by his own hand is damning. It was the ultimate act of self-destruction. If his goal was to remain unchallenged, to live forever, then sparing Lily would have served him better. He could have killed Harry, left the house untouched, and walked away stronger. Instead, he created a horcrux by accident and destroyed his own body. It is not unusual for villains to act rashly, but Voldemort, for all his evil, was rarely stupid. He infiltrated the ministry, he mastered legilimency, he charmed even Slughorn in his youth. And yet, that night, in a quiet cottage in Godric's Hollow, he made a choice that no strategist could justify. He killed a woman he didn't need to kill, and in doing so, granted her son the very tool he needed to defeat him. Logic, in its purest form, would have advised against such a risk, but Voldemort's worldview was too narrow to accommodate logic that included emotions he despised, number 16, overconfidence as a fatal flaw. Voldemort's greatest weapon was never his wand, but his towering belief in his own supremacy. He walked through the wizarding world like a god among mortals, with no room in his mind for defeat, and yet, It was this very belief, this unshakable, arrogant confidence, that planted the seeds of his downfall. Tom Riddle, the boy who became Lord Voldemort, crafted his entire existence around the idea of superiority. He was smarter, stronger, more ruthless than anyone else. He was certain of it. And so he never accounted for the possibility that someone, anyone, might outmaneuver him not through power but through cunning. When he created the horcruxes, he believed he had achieved true immortality. 7 pieces of his soul, anchored in objects he deemed worthy of containing a part of himself. The diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, Harry Potter, and a Nagini. But what he never did was check on them. He never verified that they were safe. He placed the locket in a seaside cave, protected by an enchantment that required no password, only the hope that a victim might weaken enough to drown. He entrusted the cup to Bellatrix Lestrange, a woman so unstable and erratic that placing a horcrux in her family vault was more an act of personal reverence than tactical brilliance. He believed the protections he'd put in place were more than sufficient because he couldn't imagine anyone clever enough or determined enough to get through them. Even more telling was his handling of the prophecy. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. These words from Sybil Trelawney, overheard only in part by Severus Snape, launched Voldemort into action. But instead of considering the prophecy with a strategist's mind, he read it like a threat to his ego. He assumed it meant that Harry must die because the prophecy said someone could defeat him. He did not consider the deeper possibilities. He did not entertain the idea that in trying to kill Harry, he might fulfill the prophecy himself. As Dumbledore later explained, he did not know that a part of his own soul would reside in the boy. Voldemort, so confident in his power, became the very architect of the child he sought to destroy. His mistakes were not minor, they were monumental, and they were shaped by the same flaw repeated over and over again, overconfidence. He was told by Snape that the prophecy referred to a boy born at the end of July. There were 2 candidates, Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom, but Voldemort didn't stop to consider both. He simply chose Harry, seeing himself in the half-blood child, and thus created a connection that would ultimately doom him. He made this decision not after gathering intelligence or weighing outcomes, but purely based on emotion. He saw threat in the boy who resembled his own origins and took action fueled by fear, disguised as control. This same blind spot extended to his relationships with his followers. He surrounded himself with Death Eaters who feared him but never questioned him. Bellatrix worshipped him with a fanaticism that bordered on madness, and yet Voldemort never saw her instability as a liability. He gave her access to secrets and relied on her loyalty, never once considering that her impulsiveness could jeopardize him. Lucius Malfoy, once among his most trusted, failed him with the diary, which ended up in the hands of a 12-year-old girl. Voldemort punished him, yes, but he never asked the more vital question. Was the diary protected well enough in the first place? The answer, clearly, was no. Voldemort's return to physical form in the Goblet of Fire should have marked a new chapter, one where he learned from past mistakes. Instead, he returned more arrogant than before. His first act upon regaining a body was to duel Harry Potter, a teenager, assuming that Harry's earlier survival had been pure luck. But when their wands connected through Priori Incantatem and ghosts of Voldemort's victims emerged, he was stunned. Even then, he did not reevaluate his understanding of magic. He did not reflect on how such a strange event could happen. He simply vowed to kill Harry another day. He dismissed what he did not understand. When he took over the Ministry of Magic, he believed he had won. He placed his puppet, Pius Thicknesser, as minister and began his campaign of fear and control. But while he was hunting Muggleborns and celebrating his apparent triumph, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were dismantling his empire piece by piece. They broke into the Ministry, they infiltrated Gringotts, they destroyed Horcruxes, and Voldemort, instead of suspecting that the trio had a plan, assumed his forces would stop them eventually. His pride blinded him. He couldn't comprehend the idea that 3 teenagers were systematically dismantling his path to immortality. In the Deathly Hallows, when he discovers that the Elder Wand does not obey him, he lashes out in fury. He does not question why the wand resists him. He doesn't ask whether killing Snape was truly the key. He acts out of rage, believing that brute force will solve the mystery. Dumbledore understood the wand's loyalty, the nuance of ownership and magical allegiance. Voldemort did not. His understanding of power was shallow, rooted in violence and domination, not in knowledge or nuance. Number 17, repeating the same killing curse. In the dead of night, deep within the Forbidden Forest, Voldemort stood at the height of his power. His Death Eaters waited in tense silence, the damp leaves beneath their feet, not daring to rustle. The air was heavy, the stillness almost sacred. Then came the soft sound of approaching footsteps. Not the frantic stride of someone chased, but the slow, deliberate walk of one who has made peace with death. It was Harry Potter, no wand in hand, no protective enchantments around him, no resistance in his eyes, just surrender. Voldemort saw him, and for a brief moment, even the most twisted of minds might have registered that this was what he had always wanted. His enemy, broken and helpless, stepping forward not as a warrior, but as a sacrifice. And yet, in this moment of ultimate triumph, Voldemort made the most illogical choice of his life. He raised his wand and spoke the words he had spoken countless times before. Avada Kedavra. The green light surged forward, the killing curse hurled once again at the boy who had survived it as a baby. A spell that had already failed once, a spell that was tied to a prophecy, to a mother's love, to a rebounded curse, to the very unraveling of Voldemort's soul. He used it again, knowing its history with this boy, knowing its history with himself. He cast it not with caution, but with arrogance, and in doing so he once more lost everything. It defied logic. Voldemort, the master of dark arts, the manipulator of death itself, chose to use the one spell that had proven unreliable against Harry. He had other options, spells of destruction, of dismemberment, of fire and fury. He could have burned Harry's body to ash with fiend fire, the same cursed flame that destroyed a horcrux in the Room of Requirement. He could have used the blasting curse to reduce him to blood and bone, used ancient magic unknown to even Dumbledore, or simply snapped his neck with a flick of his wand. And yet he repeated the same action that had been his downfall before. This was not the calculated move of a genius, it was the reflex of a man imprisoned by his own myth. The forest around them was alive with silence. Every Death Eater watched, breath held, as Voldemort committed the act. But none dared question the method. Not Bellatrix Lestrange, who hung on his every word. Not Lucius Malfoy, who stood broken, hoping only for his family's survival. No one asked why Voldemort chose this path again, and so history repeated itself. The spell hit Harry, his body collapsed, but death did not claim him. Deep within him, the shard of Voldemort's own soul, the parasite born from the first failed curse, was destroyed instead. The true Harry Potter survived once more. What Voldemort failed to grasp was the very nature of magic itself. Magic in the Harry Potter universe is not merely a tool. It has rhythm, personality, even preferences. It respects intent, but it also rewards creativity, emotion, and sacrifice. Dumbledore understood this, which is why he crafted plans around love and choice, not brute force. Voldemort, by contrast, was a creature of repetition. He relied on intimidation and raw power, but never innovation. He had the Elder Wand in his hand, the most powerful wand ever made, yet it did not belong to him. Its loyalty was elsewhere, and that subtle thread of loyalty unraveled his final act. By using Avada Kedavra again, Voldemort essentially enacted a ritual he did not understand. He tried to rewrite fate using the same pen that had blotted his name from destiny once before. It was magical hubris at its finest. He believed that with enough force, enough hatred, and the Elder Wand in his grasp, he could overcome history. He thought magic obeyed strength alone. But magic in Rowling's world is a living thing. It respects bravery. It rebels against predictability. It is not a machine. It is a mirror. There's a line in Deathly Hallows that encapsulates this perfectly. When Harry is in King's Cross after being hit by the curse, Dumbledore says, "Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living and, above all, those who live without love." Voldemort was the ultimate example of such a life. Every decision he made was devoid of affection or empathy. He saw magic as a weapon, not as a wonder. He missed the deeper currents. He didn't understand that by walking into the forest to die, Harry had cast the most powerful protection imaginable over everyone who stood against Voldemort. The moment Voldemort used the same spell again, he was unknowingly sealing his fate. Even the symbolism should have warned him. Avada Kedavra is death without pain, death without suffering. It is quick, clean, clinical, but Voldemort's entire life was about control, about forcing others to kneel. Why then grant Harry such an easy death? Why not torture him first? Why not humiliate him before the crowd? Because Voldemort wanted finality. He wanted to erase Harry as efficiently as possible, as if killing him again would correct the wrongs of the past. It was desperation, dressed as dominance. The irony is that Voldemort prided himself on being the most intelligent wizard of his age. He dissected life and death, split his soul into 7 parts, tricked death itself, so he thought. But when faced with a vulnerable, wandless Harry, he reverted to habit. There was no strategy, only a belief that this time, finally, the spell would work as intended. And when Harry fell, Voldemort believed he had won. But true victory had already slipped through his fingers. Number 18. Ignoring Muggle technology and knowledge. Of all the baffling decisions Voldemort made in his ruthless quest for power, one stands out as a blunder so profound it defies even the darkest of logic, his willful ignorance of the Muggle world and its technology. For a man so obsessed with victory, so desperate to conquer death itself, Voldemort's refusal to exploit the vast knowledge of the non-magical majority seems less a choice and more a fatal flaw, a blind spot rooted in prejudice, arrogance, and intellectual laziness. Magic, in all its splendor, was his chosen weapon, but magic alone cannot explain the success of conquest, especially not when your enemy is cunning, organized, and, unlike you, willing to adapt. This arrogance was not subtle. It pulsed in every decision he made. Despite being born Tom Marvolo Riddle, a half-blood with a Muggle father, Voldemort severed himself from the Muggle world with surgical precision. He mocked it, rejected it, buried it beneath layers of superiority complex. But by doing so, he also severed access to nearly all global knowledge and practical tools that could have tilted the war entirely in his favor. It wasn't just hatred. It was blindness, a blindness that in retrospect cost him everything. Imagine the possibilities had Voldemort possessed even a fraction of curiosity about Muggle innovation. The wizarding world is notoriously insular, yes, but this was a man who created 7 horcruxes, defied death, mastered wandless magic, and communed with serpents. To assume he was incapable of grasping basic Muggle technology would be insulting. But it wasn't a lack of ability, it was contempt masquerading as principle. To Voldemort, understanding the Muggle world was beneath him, and that was his most human flaw of all. There is a telling moment in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire where Arthur Weasley, an affable and fascinated pureblood, remarks, "What exactly is the function of a rubber duck?" The line is comedic, sure, but it also reveals something chilling. Most wizards, especially purebloods, have almost no understanding of the Muggle world. Now imagine Voldemort, who despised even the idea of Muggles, ever attempting to comprehend something as simple as electricity. He didn't just misunderstand them, he refused to learn. Yet for all his magical might, he could have been unstoppable had he simply used tools readily available to even a schoolboy in London. Consider surveillance cameras, mundane, reliable, omnipresent. Voldemort's attempts to locate the Order of the Phoenix headquarters were inefficient and outdated. He relied on magical informants, traitors, and spells of detection. But what if he had simply placed a discreet Muggle camera outside number 12, Grimmauld Place? Even if the house was hidden by the Fidelius charm, the people coming and going were not. A camera could have captured Remus Lupin, Tonks, or Sirius Black as they approached. Faces on tape, locations recorded, timelines traced. That kind of data, combined with magic, would have made Voldemort's search terrifyingly effective. Or take communications. The wizarding world still relied on owlpost and face-to-face meetings in the 1990s, while Muggles were already using email, mobile phones, and encrypted transmissions. Voldemort's forces depended on the Dark Mark and manual scouting. The Order used Patronuses and parchment. Meanwhile, a single tapped phone line could have unraveled entire resistance movements. A bug in the Dursleys' house might have told Voldemort when Harry Potter was on the move. Instead, he relied on Lucius Malfoy to plant a diary in a bathroom, antiquated and inefficient. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore and Harry travel to find one of Voldemort's horcruxes in a cave by the sea. The journey requires blood, fire, potion, and sheer willpower. But what if Voldemort had secured that location with Muggle trip sensors, thermal cameras, or landmines, things no wizard would expect, and most wouldn't know how to disable? He protected his soul with riddles and enchantments, but never once considered physical technology as a layer of security. A drone flying over that cliff would have spotted intruders long before they reached the inner lake. It's staggering how his brilliance stopped where the magical ended. Voldemort's disregard extended beyond tech. It reached the strategic core of intelligence. The British Muggle government operates MI5 and MI6, domestic and foreign intelligence agencies. They monitor threats, observe patterns, track anomalies. What if Voldemort had infiltrated them? Or better yet, impersonated them through Polyjuice or Imperius? The Death Eaters could have accessed real-time information about city surveillance, traffic data, military deployments, an entire network of power untouched by Wand. They could have crippled London in minutes, but Voldemort didn't even try. His infiltration methods remained medieval. He used torture, blackmail, and memory-altering spells, all powerful in their way, but laughably inefficient when compared to Muggle methods of espionage. No databases, no digital footprints, no intelligence reports, no satellites. For a man obsessed with immortality, Voldemort planned like a general from the Dark Ages. It is almost poetic, in a tragic way, how he ignored the very tools that could have made his nightmare world inevitable. We also must examine his recruiting strategy. Voldemort recruited from within the wizarding community, primarily pure-blood families or dark-aligned sympathizers. Yet there are 7 billion people on Earth, the vast majority of whom are Muggles. He never considered weaponizing them. With the right manipulation, propaganda, or magical subjugation, he could have turned Muggles into foot soldiers. He had the Imperius Curse at his disposal. Why not use it on a political leader or media mogul? With enough subtle influence, Voldemort could have had entire governments acting in his favor without casting a single, unforgivable curse publicly. Consider, too, the media. Rita Skeeter may have been the wizarding equivalent of a tabloid parasite, but her articles swayed public opinion. Voldemort ignored the Muggle media entirely. Had he inserted false stories, fabricated panic, or hijacked broadcasts, he could have created chaos on a national scale. Imagine nightly news reporting mysterious deaths, child disappearances, or fires seeded and fed by Death Eaters. He didn't need dark marks in the sky, he needed headlines. Fear spreads faster through words than smoke. Even his use of travel was archaic. Voldemort flew, he apparated, he used enchanted doors. But he never once used trains, planes, or highways. Networks that crisscrossed the globe with relentless efficiency. Had he studied Muggle logistics, Voldemort could have coordinated attacks across continents. A wizard with a cell phone and a map could manage more territory in a day than a dozen broom-mounted Death Eaters. But Voldemort kept his war small and internal, bound by the British Isles and by the limits of his outdated imagination. This failure wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. Voldemort's contempt for Muggles was a rejection of evolution. Muggles had, without a trace of magic, built cities that floated on water, machines that touched the stars, medicines that cured death for decades. They had created the internet, decoded DNA, mapped galaxies, and still he saw them as lesser. He saw tools but never threats. He saw toys but never tactics, and in this blindness he fell victim to a world he didn't even believe was worth understanding. In the Deathly Hallows, when Voldemort finally takes control of the Ministry of Magic, he still uses fear, punishment, and surveillance the old-fashioned way. The Muggle-born Registration Commission is a show trial, not a covert operation. There's no subtlety, no strategy. The process is brutal, visible, and doomed to collapse. Meanwhile, Muggle regimes have toppled nations with misinformation and shadow operations. Voldemort didn't lack cruelty, he lacked imagination. Some might argue that magic interferes with electronics, that spells and fields might make technology unstable, but this is never clearly defined in canon, and even if it were true, it only underscores the absurdity of Voldemort's disinterest. Wouldn't a curious and strategic mind at least test these theories, try to neutralize magical interference or build a hybrid? The man who created a floating fetus body and split his soul 7 ways couldn't rig a CCTV camera. Please. And what of Gringotts, the most secure bank in the magical world, guarded by goblins and dragons, but no surveillance, no motion sensors, no magnetic locks? The final heist, Harry's break-in, proves just how unprepared the magical world is against tactical planning. Voldemort never questioned it, never fortified it, never asked how a non-magical bank might protect itself from an intruder. If he had, perhaps he would have secured his horcruxes with more than just goblin pride and paranoia. The irony is that Voldemort died not from a curse, but from ignorance. He never considered that love could be a shield. He never considered that Harry's survival might hinge on sacrifice and trust, Muggle virtues more human than magical. He feared prophecy, but he never feared intelligence, never feared the mind, and that is why he lost. Had he simply opened a book, not a spell book, but a history text, a physics manual, a sociology primer, he might have realized how dangerous the Muggle world truly was, not because it was filled with warriors, but because it was filled with knowledge. Voldemort had power, but knowledge, as the old saying goes, is power too. Ultimately, it wasn't the wand that betrayed him. It wasn't Snape or Draco or Bellatrix. It was his own mind. Locked in an ivory tower of blood purity and ancient spells, Voldemort died in a war he didn't truly understand, not because he couldn't win, but because he refused to learn how. Number 19, underestimating the power of love. Lord Voldemort, once Tom Marvolo Riddle, was hailed as the most brilliant student to ever walk the halls of Hogwarts. His command of magic was exceptional, his mind sharper than any blade, and his ambitions grander than any before him. And yet, despite his mastery of the dark arts and his obsession with immortality, he made one fatal mistake, a mistake so deeply rooted in his very identity that he never saw it until it was far too late. He underestimated the most ancient, the most powerful, and the most underestimated force in the wizarding world: love. What makes this mistake particularly damning is not merely that Voldemort ignored love, but that he actively dismissed it, sneered at it, and ridiculed those who spoke of it. And in doing so, he ensured his own destruction. It was not ignorance. Voldemort was not a fool. He knew what love was supposed to be. He had seen the way others spoke of it, the way it shaped lives and decisions. But because he had never felt it, he deemed it a weakness. He deemed it a lie. Born from a loveless union, conceived under the effects of a love potion, Tom Riddle never knew the safety of a mother's arms or the warmth of a father's gaze. The very concept of love to him was alien, something to be scorned, not studied. And so, when Dumbledore warned him of forces he did not understand, he laughed. "There is nothing worse than death," he once said, exposing his fear and blindness in a single sentence. To him, love was irrelevant because it could not protect from death. But he was wrong. The clearest manifestation of this blindness was his decision to kill Lily Potter, despite her willingness to sacrifice herself for her son. Voldemort was warned by Severus Snape to spare her. Not out of compassion. Snape's request came from selfish love, but still the opportunity was there. Yet Voldemort, arrogant and detached, chose power over understanding. He ignored the ancient magical protection born from selfless sacrifice. He killed her anyway, and in doing so he unknowingly created a shield stronger than any spell, one that would rebound his own killing curse and reduce him to a bodiless spirit. The protection Lily gave Harry was not simply metaphorical. It lived in his blood, in the very fabric of his being. Dumbledore understood this. "Your mother died to save you. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love," he told Harry. This was not just a sentimental idea, it was magic, deep, ancient, and binding. Voldemort, for all his obsession with the old ways and forbidden knowledge, failed to study this magic. He failed to grasp that not all power comes from domination. Some power is born from letting go. And even when he returned to full strength, this lesson eluded him. The resurrection ritual in Goblet of Fire used Harry's blood. Harry, the one protected by sacrificial love. Voldemort thought he was clever. He thought he had outwitted Dumbledore by taking into himself the very blood that had defeated him. But again, he misunderstood the nature of that power. He assumed that by possessing Harry's blood, he was protected from its effects. In truth, he was anchoring his life to something that would always defy him. His blindness to love was further revealed in his treatment of his followers. He did not inspire loyalty through kindness or shared purpose, but through fear and manipulation. Bellatrix Lestrange worshipped him, but Voldemort never once returned her devotion. He saw people as tools, and when those tools failed, he cast them aside or killed them. When Narcissa Malfoy lied to him about Harry being dead during the Battle of Hogwarts, it was not courage or rebellion that motivated her. It was a mother's love. That love saved Harry again. Voldemort, who thought he had won, was outmaneuvered by an emotion he believed beneath him. In contrast, Harry grew stronger through love. His friendship with Ron and Hermione grounded him. His connection to Sirius, to Lupin, to the Order of the Phoenix, all of them were built on trust and mutual care. Even when he lost them, their love remained a part of him. It guided his decisions, it gave him purpose. It was why he returned from the forest after willingly walking into death, because he loved and was loved in return. It is telling that in Deathly Hallows, Harry willingly gives himself to death, knowing it will save others. Voldemort never understood this choice. He couldn't. He saw self-sacrifice as madness, and yet it was precisely this act that disarmed him. When Harry returns, protected by the same kind of magic his mother once gave him, Voldemort is no longer the master of death. He is merely a man, armed with a wand he does not truly own, facing a boy who understands something greater than power. Throughout the series, Dumbledore acts as the quiet voice of reason, constantly reminding Harry that love is his greatest weapon. Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love. This line encapsulates the essence of Voldemort's tragedy. He lived without love, not because he could not have it, but because he chose not to understand it. That choice was not born from strength. It was fear, fear of vulnerability, fear of the unknown, fear of losing control. The irony is that Voldemort spent his life chasing immortality, creating horcruxes, tearing apart his soul to escape death. And yet, in the end, it was love, an invisible, intangible force that outlasted him. His horcruxes were destroyed not by brute force alone, but by people fighting for those they loved. Neville kills Nagini for his fallen friends. Ron destroys the locket to protect Hermione. Harry faces death to save everyone. Each act was driven by love. Voldemort died alone, unloved, unwept. One could argue that his hatred for love stemmed from a lack of experience, that he was not truly evil, only damaged. But even then, there were moments when he could have chosen differently. He could have responded to Dumbledore's kindness as a boy. He could have spared Lily. He could have tried to understand why Harry survived. But his pride, his disdain for anything not rooted in control, closed those doors forever. Even his final confrontation with Harry reveals this flaw. Voldemort demands that Harry die begging. He cannot understand defiance born from love. "You've lost, Voldemort," Harry says, "because all you've got is power, and that's not enough." Voldemort sneers, but his spells no longer work the way they used to. The Elder Wand refuses to obey him. The people he commands scatter. He is a tyrant built on sand, facing a tide of something he never prepared for. Consider, too, his reaction to the prophecy. He hears only what he fears, a child who might defeat him. He chooses to act violently, never considering that his very response will fulfill the prophecy. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches," says the prophecy. It could have been Neville. Voldemort's choice makes it Harry. If he had paused to consider the nature of that power, what it might be, why it mattered, he might have discovered that it wasn't about curses or potions, but about sacrifice. But that would require humility, something he never had. Dumbledore, flawed as he was, understood the complexity of love. He protected Harry not just with magic, but with truth, however painful. He guided him not to glory, but to understanding. Dumbledore's love for people, for peace, even for the boy he once tried to manipulate, gave him clarity. Voldemort, by contrast, was blinded by his own reflection. He saw the world as a mirror of himself, cold, cruel, transactional. He could not fathom a mother dying for her child, a friend staying in the face of danger, a boy choosing death over revenge. In the end, Voldemort dies not just from a backfired spell or a failed prophecy. He dies from a lifetime of wrong assumptions. He thought love was weakness. He thought emotions were chains. He thought that if he destroyed enough, killed enough, he would be free. But true freedom comes from connection, and true strength comes not from domination, but from compassion. Harry's power was not in his wand, but in his heart. This is why Voldemort's downfall is more than a magical defeat. It is a philosophical one. He built an empire on fear, but it was undone by hope. He sought to silence love, but it echoed louder than any curse. His life was a testament to what happens when one refuses to see the full spectrum of human experience, and his death was the final note in a symphony he never understood. To say that Voldemort simply lost because of love is not enough. He lost because he never even tried to understand it. He had the intelligence, he had the opportunity, but he dismissed it as nonsense. And that is perhaps the most illogical decision of all, because in a world where magic is real, it was love that proved to be the most powerful magic of all. Number 20, always playing the obvious game. Lord Voldemort believed fear was the sharpest weapon, but he wielded it like a blunt instrument. He stepped into every scene cloaked in spectacle, thunder, and blood, as though subtlety were beneath him. In truth, the Dark Lord had no patience for patience. He craved immediate submission, not quiet infiltration. But in a world where emotions were complex and loyalties fragile, the lack of nuance cost him more than he realized. He had the power to reshape the wizarding world, but his obsession with domination blinded him to quieter victories. His greatest error was treating every confrontation like a battlefield instead of a chessboard. And that mistake, repeated time and again, led to his downfall. In his pursuit of Harry Potter, Voldemort never once considered the value of psychological warfare. He could have exploited Harry's trauma, insecurities, or loneliness. He could have been the voice in Harry's ear that made him question everything: Dumbledore's intentions, Hermione's trust, Ron's loyalty. Yet the Dark Lord never planted a single seed of doubt. He always struck with fire, never with ice. It was a curious failure for someone so consumed by control. There was a time when the smallest act of manipulation could have turned Harry's world upside down, but Voldemort preferred firestorms to whispers. And whispers, ironically, were all it would have taken. Take, for instance, Harry's second year at Hogwarts. The diary of Tom Riddle, a piece of Voldemort's own soul, had already proven that memories could influence the living. Ginny Weasley was manipulated through written words, coaxed into vulnerability until her will collapsed. Why did Voldemort never attempt the same method with Harry himself? A carefully constructed letter, a cursed object laced with persuasive illusions, or a falsified memory inserted via legilimency, these were not outside his capabilities. Instead, Voldemort resorted to crude shows of force, like possessing Harry outright in the Department of Mysteries, in front of witnesses and magical alarms. The subtle path, though proven effective, was dismissed, and that refusal to adapt revealed a frightening rigidity. The failure to recognize Harry's need for connection was perhaps the Dark Lord's most critical oversight. Harry was not immune to influence. He feared becoming like Voldemort. He was isolated by fame, guilt, and the burden of prophecy. He questioned authority, especially as Dumbledore kept secrets from him. There were many cracks in his armor. A whisper of truth from the wrong mouth could have changed everything. If Voldemort had played on those fears, created the illusion of kinship, even briefly, he might have sown chaos among the trio. But he never made the attempt. He preferred to invade Harry's dreams with visions of death rather than confusion. The latter might have brought far more destruction. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore himself remarked, "Voldemort has never needed a reason to kill." That line, though simple, says much. He didn't want minds, he wanted corpses. When Harry began having visions of Voldemort's actions, the Dark Lord had a priceless opportunity. Through the mental connection, he could have implanted false scenarios, scenes of Dumbledore harming innocents, of the Order's betrayals, of Sirius alive and hidden by choice. But the only illusion he ever attempted was a singular, obvious one: Sirius's torture at the Ministry, and even that failed because it lacked realism. Voldemort had no understanding of nuance. He mistook panic for strategy. Consider the events of Goblet of Fire. When Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, successfully manipulated events from within Hogwarts, it was proof that infiltration could work. That year, Voldemort came closer to defeating Harry than ever before, precisely because he wasn't present. It was the work of someone who understood manipulation. Barty didn't use threats, he used trust. He guided Harry through the tasks, made him believe in guidance, in mentorship. Had Voldemort followed that model, had he impersonated someone trusted or altered Harry's memories, he might have controlled him without lifting a wand. But once again, Voldemort emerged from the cauldron in a graveyard, shouted threats and staged a duel. Theatrics, not strategy. The obsession with theatrics reached its peak during the Battle of Hogwarts. As the school prepared for war, Voldemort delivered booming ultimatums through enchanted voices and air-thick threats. He told the defenders that Harry was already dead, that Dumbledore's army would crumble. He believed that submission could be forced through noise. But what if he had done the opposite? What if, rather than attacking the school, he had appealed to its students, planted doubts among them, spread rumors that Harry was lying, that Dumbledore had betrayed them, that the Ministry had been right? Even a sliver of discord could have divided them. Instead, he marched like a general through fog, expecting surrender. Voldemort's failure wasn't just a tactical one, it was personal. He never understood the human heart. He believed that fear ruled all, But love proved stronger, time after time. He dismissed love as weakness, yet it saved Harry in infancy, protected him in the graveyard, and empowered him in the forest. Every time Voldemort lashed out with blunt force, love struck back with precision. The man who feared death above all had no grasp of what it meant to live. And because he couldn't understand life, he couldn't anticipate its defenses, love, loyalty, sacrifice. These were invisible weapons he never saw coming. His approach with Snape is another example. Snape, who was perhaps the most skilled actor and double agent in the series, was never truly trusted. Voldemort kept him close but doubted his motives. He took Snape's loyalty for granted, assuming his fear was stronger than his grief. But had he bothered to understand Snape's love for Lily Potter, he would have seen the betrayal coming. Instead, Voldemort used him like a pawn and killed him for a wand that never served him. The irony was cruel. The only servant he could have truly trusted was the one he discarded, and all because he misunderstood the simplest emotion. Even in the creation of his horcruxes, Voldemort showed a preference for flair over logic. He chose high-profile objects, Slytherin's locket, Hufflepuff's cup, Ravenclaw's diadem. Each was a clue, each tied to a known historical relic. Why not create a horcrux in something mundane, a pebble, a sock, a button from a school uniform? He wanted immortality, but he also wanted legacy. He could not bear to hide in obscurity. His pride made him traceable. The man who feared death made his soul into a museum exhibition. Harry, Ron, and Hermione followed the trail like breadcrumbs, and Voldemort never once questioned how obvious it was. The contrast between Voldemort and Dumbledore only heightens the absurdity. Dumbledore worked in shadows, used silence as a weapon. He didn't yell, he whispered. He didn't command, he guided. Voldemort saw this and called it weakness. He never understood that the strongest force isn't a scream but a truth told quietly. When Dumbledore led Harry through memories in the Pensieve, he was constructing a strategy that spanned decades. Voldemort never thought that far ahead. His plans were urgent, angry, reactive. Even his resurrection was a rush job, using the bones of his father and the blood of a child he didn't understand. He returned, screaming. He could have returned unseen. Voldemort's arrogance was so great that he believed he could kill Harry with a single curse, again and again. But by the final confrontation, the killing curse had become a punchline. It rebounded more times than it landed. Voldemort used it because it symbolized power, but power is nothing without intelligence. He never once asked why Harry survived. He dismissed the idea of sacrificial magic because it was unquantifiable. In his mind, anything without a wand or a prophecy was beneath notice. So he kept using the same weapon over and over, expecting different results. A curse without strategy is just noise. The Ministry of Magic itself was ripe for manipulation. Had Voldemort remained hidden within its corridors after taking over, using subtlety instead of banners and slogans, he might have reshaped Wizarding Britain without resistance. Instead, he turned the Ministry into a fascist theatre, broadcasting fear, conducting public trials, and installing Umbridge as a tyrant. The resistance grew because it was provoked. If he had worked in silence, undermined key figures, and offered safety in exchange for loyalty, the public might have embraced him without knowing. But Voldemort didn't want followers. He wanted subjects. He ruled with fire, not suggestion. He could have approached Draco Malfoy with mentorship instead of menace. By threatening his family, Voldemort ensured Draco would act out of fear, not conviction. If he had offered power, freedom, or even praise, Draco might have become a loyal weapon. Instead, he crumbled under pressure. Narcissa Malfoy's lie in the forest, telling Voldemort that Harry was dead, was born not of rebellion, but of maternal love. Yet Voldemort never saw it. He believed the Malfoys were broken, submissive. He was wrong because he never inspired loyalty, only terror, and terror breeds betrayal. Even the prophecy was a chance he misread. Neither can live while the other survives is a riddle. not an instruction. Voldemort treated it as a rule to follow. He created his own enemy by trying to prevent him. If he had ignored the prophecy or tried to befriend the Potters or at least watched Harry from a distance, the outcome could have been different. But he acted on impulse. A toddler was declared an enemy and a war was set in motion, all because the man who feared fate more than anything decided to fight it with raw force rather than wit. In the final duel, Voldemort still didn't understand why the Elder Wand betrayed him. He demanded obedience, but wands choose wizards. They respond to allegiance, not fear. Harry had loyalty, Voldemort had intimidation. And so the wand turned. It was poetic, really, the master of death undone by the tool he tried to own. And even then he died as he lived, loudly, arrogantly, believing in his own legend. No plan, no backup, just a flash of green and a fall. For all his power, Voldemort never learned to think like a human. And in a world ruled by love, fear is only the first move, not the last. Number 21. Forgetting Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw. When Voldemort launched his final assault on Hogwarts, his strategic failures were many, but one stands out as both baffling and fatal: his complete disregard for Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff. Obsessed with the binary opposition of Gryffindor against Slytherin, he reduced the complex tapestry of Hogwarts into a battlefield of two houses, ignoring the potential power, loyalty, and intelligence harbored by the other two. In doing so, he committed a strategic blunder so profound that it ultimately paved the way for his own defeat. Voldemort, for all his cunning, was blind to nuance, and it cost him dearly. He assumed that all Gryffindors were brave fools and all Slytherins were natural allies. From this narrow lens, he saw Ravenclaws as irrelevant intellectuals and Hufflepuffs as harmless plodders. He made no overtures to sway them, no promises of power or protection. And yet, in both those houses lay individuals who might have been swayed, not out of malice, but out of ambition, fear, or a desire for survival. He underestimated them not because of their power, but because of his own arrogance. Voldemort viewed complexity as weakness, and so he turned away from the most unpredictable parts of the human soul. The Death Eaters had long since infiltrated key parts of wizarding society, ministry departments, the press, even Hogwarts itself through professors like Quirrell and Snape. But no Death Eater ever stood from Hufflepuff, no known ally from Ravenclaw, and that wasn't because none could be turned. It was because Voldemort never bothered trying. He didn't understand them. His hatred for Muggle-borns and his obsession with blood purity made him blind to any form of strength he didn't already recognize. He mistook unfamiliarity for inferiority. The strategy was flawed from the beginning. Ravenclaws, with their obsession for knowledge, might have welcomed the chance to learn magic lost to time, or to explore the boundaries of power that Voldemort claimed to command. But Voldemort offered no such bait. He could have appeared as a bringer of secrets, a guardian of ancient truth. He could have tempted them with lore even Dumbledore had hidden. But instead he sneered at intellect. "There is no good and evil," he once said. "There is only power, and those too weak to seek it." He misunderstood that Ravenclaws were seekers, not of power, but of understanding. Had he offered knowledge instead of domination, perhaps some would have listened. And what of the Hufflepuffs? The house, so often mocked for its inclusiveness and loyalty, was a sleeping lion. Hufflepuffs are not weak, they are steadfast. When they choose to stand, they stand to the end, but they must be seen and respected, and Voldemort was incapable of such recognition. He never sought to court their loyalty, even though theirs was the loyalty that would never betray him. Unlike the Slytherins, who switched sides as the tide turned, Hufflepuffs would have fought to the death had they believed in his cause. But Voldemort didn't see that kind of strength. He dismissed it, just as he dismissed Neville Longbottom. Neville, the boy who could have been the chosen one, the boy whose parents were tortured into madness by Bellatrix Lestrange, the boy whom Voldemort never once considered a threat. That mistake cost him everything. In the final battle, it was Neville who pulled the sword of Gryffindor from the sorting hat and severed the head of Nagini, Voldemort's last horcrux. "The snake's dead," he shouted, and with those words, Voldemort's immortality crumbled, and yet even in that moment, Voldemort looked at Neville as an insect, an afterthought. What would have happened had Voldemort tried to sway someone like Terry Boot of Ravenclaw? Terry, who was intelligent and questioning, who joined Dumbledore's army and defied the Carrows even under torture? Or what about Zacharias Smith, the Hufflepuff who was critical and arrogant, yet skilled and independent-minded? Neither of them were inherently resistant to temptation. A targeted campaign of manipulation could have won allies among students less loyal than Neville, Luna, or Ginny. But Voldemort never engaged in such subtle games. He used fear and dominance, not persuasion. When the Carrows took over Hogwarts in the 7th year, they focused on punishing the visible dissenters, mostly Gryffindors. Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs were often collateral damage or ignored unless they caused trouble. That passive stance allowed Dumbledore's army to flourish in the shadows, supported by students from all houses. In fact, the Room of Requirement, which became the heart of the Resistance, housed more than just Gryffindors. Ernie Macmillan, a Hufflepuff, stayed, Michael Corner of Ravenclaw too, but Voldemort never asked why. He never wondered how such cross-house loyalty had formed. He just assumed it was Harry's charm. Luna Lovegood, the ethereal Ravenclaw with strange beliefs and unshakable loyalty, was another blind spot. Voldemort had her imprisoned at Malfoy Manor, but he never understood her. He saw her oddities and dismissed her mind. Yet Luna was one of the few who saw through illusions, literal and metaphorical. She believed in things most wizards ignored, and that gave her a clarity of vision even Voldemort lacked. She never flinched, not even under duress. She saw his soul for what it was: empty. Even among professors, Voldemort's biases blinded him. He trusted Snape not because of his brilliance, but because he believed he owned him. He overlooked the insight of Professor Flitwick, a Ravenclaw and a master duelist, who helped defend the castle. He never saw Pomona Sprout, the head of Hufflepuff, as a threat. Yet it was Sprout who led her house in the final defense, who grew explosive plants and fought on the front lines. His inability to respect their roles allowed the defenders to organize in ways he never anticipated. His obsession with the prophecy also distorted his vision. Because it named Harry, he focused on him and dismissed all others. He believed himself the only true threat and Harry the only worthy adversary. That tunnel vision excluded countless threats: the quiet loyalty of Hannah Abbott, the courage of Susan Bones, the resilience of Cho Chang. These students, ignored and underestimated, became the web that sustained the resistance. Voldemort thought he was fighting a boy. In truth, he was fighting a generation. Even when he finally entered Hogwarts during the Battle of the Castle, his focus remained on Harry and Dumbledore's former allies. He issued a call for Harry to surrender, but he never addressed the school's other houses directly. "You have fought valiantly. Lord Voldemort knows how to value bravery." That line, aimed at Gryffindors, was almost mocking. But no word was spoken to Ravenclaws or Hufflepuffs. He didn't try to sow doubt among them, didn't ask for defections, didn't offer clemency. He simply assumed they were irrelevant. Voldemort's world was one of dominance and submission. He could not understand houses that thrived on cooperation or intellectual freedom. His own followers were recruited through fear and flattery, not through shared vision. He saw the world in black and white, Slytherin or Gryffindor, Death Eater or enemy. In doing so, he ignored the grey spaces where revolutions truly form. Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs were the grey: quiet, watchful, capable. And because he ignored them, they became the silent architects of his fall. Aberforth Dumbledore, not a professor nor a member of the Order proper, played a key role in getting students out of the castle through the Hog's Head tunnel. Among them were Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws who had stayed behind to fight. Voldemort never saw that coming. He thought the students would run, or that only Gryffindors would fight. But the resistance was not about house loyalty, it was about choosing the right side, something Voldemort never understood because he never believed in choice, he believed in fate. Perhaps the cruelest irony of all, Helga Hufflepuff's cup, turned into a horcrux by Voldemort himself, was destroyed by Hermione Granger in the Chamber of Secrets. The very symbol of the house he disdained became a vessel for his twisted soul, and its destruction a step toward his downfall. And then Nagini, the last horcrux, was killed by a Hufflepuff. Voldemort's final undoing came from the house he had always overlooked. There is a passage in the books that summarizes Voldemort's flaw. Dumbledore says, "Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." Voldemort lived without love, but also without understanding. He saw only what he wanted to see. He imagined enemies only where he saw open defiance and allies only where he had imposed control. He never looked at those who stood quietly, who thought deeply, who waited. But they were always there, and when the time came, they rose. Had he reached out to them, had he tried to understand even one Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw, perhaps the war would have ended differently. But Voldemort was incapable of connection. His leadership was domination, his vision a cage, and in that cage he sealed his fate, not because he was weak, but because he refused to see where strength truly lived. It was never just Harry, it was never just Gryffindor, it was the quiet strength of the many, the unexpected bravery of the ignored, the intelligence of the misjudged. Voldemort, in his arrogance, created his own blind spot, and into that blind spot stepped Neville Longbottom, sword in hand, ready to end what began not with a prophecy, but with a choice to underestimate an entire half of Hogwarts. Number 22. Trusting the worst candidates. Voldemort's downfall was not written in prophecy alone, nor sealed by a boy's scar. It was, in part, shaped by his own astonishing failure to choose his allies with even a shred of rational judgment. He believed himself above error, above consequence, and in doing so entrusted the future of his empire to a parade of the least qualified individuals the wizarding world could offer. A general does not hand a sword to a coward, nor send a lunatic into a room full of whispers and expect diplomacy. Yet Voldemort, blinded by his arrogance, did both, again and again. Consider the appointment of Bellatrix Lestrange, a woman whose devotion was matched only by her madness. Voldemort did not simply tolerate her fanatical obsession, he encouraged it, rewarded it, and in the end was betrayed by the very instability that burned in her eyes. Bellatrix was not loyal because she believed in his cause, she was loyal because she worshipped him. "The Dark Lord has in the past entrusted me with his most precious," she once boasted, before descending into one of her familiar episodes of manic fervor. Her every action was driven by obsession, not strategy. She murdered without necessity, tortured without purpose, and her lack of restraint cost Voldemort crucial support among even his own Death Eaters. Worse still was Peter Pettigrew. That Voldemort would trust this pitiful, spineless traitor with his very resurrection is perhaps the clearest proof of his warped judgment. "Wormtail, you return to me, not out of loyalty, but out of fear," Voldemort himself remarked. And yet he handed this man his own infant-like form, asked him to brew the most sacred potion of rebirth, and let him perform a ritual that would shape the future of the wizarding world. A man who betrayed his closest friends for survival was never going to be a loyal servant. Pettigrew's every step was hesitant, his every word a plea for mercy. The moment Voldemort's star dimmed, he would have vanished like mist in the morning sun. Even Lucius Malfoy, polished and cunning, was a disaster in disguise. Voldemort made him keeper of the very diary that was to serve as a vessel of his soul. And what did Lucius do? he slipped it into a 12-year-old girl's belongings in a fit of petty revenge against Arthur Weasley. There was no grand plan, no coordination with other Death Eaters, no fallback if the diary failed. When it did, Lucius tried to distance himself, terrified of Voldemort's wrath. "You have lost me my servant, Lucius," Voldemort snarled upon his return, and still Voldemort kept him close, as if wealth and breeding compensated for reckless incompetence. The loyalty Voldemort demanded was never built on respect or shared ideology. It was built on fear. But fear, while potent in the short term, cannot forge unity. His followers turned on each other in whispers and betrayals. Not distrusted Avery. Mulciber mocked the Carrows themselves, barely literate in advanced magic, were chosen to run Hogwarts during its darkest hour. They turned a school into a slaughterhouse, but the blood they spilled earned Voldemort no new soldiers, only resistance, swelling in the shadows. The decision to trust Barty Crouch Jr. with the infiltration of Hogwarts is another example of egregious misjudgment. Yes, Crouch was skilled, brilliant even, in the art of deception, but he was also deeply unstable, a product of Azkaban and obsession. Voldemort placed a mission of cosmic importance, planting Harry Potter into the graveyard, into the hands of a man who couldn't keep his twitching under control. That it succeeded at all is a testament not to Voldemort's wisdom, but to sheer chance and the strength of Crouch's personal delusions. The moment he broke cover, the plan collapsed in chaos. Even among the giants, Voldemort chose poorly. Fenrir Greyback, a werewolf whose only interest lay in devouring children, was allowed to operate with near impunity. His presence was tolerated not for any magical skill or tactical insight, but for the terror he instilled. This was Voldemort's metric, not who was wise or clever or trustworthy, but who inspired the most dread. Greyback's inclusion cost the Death Eaters any chance of legitimacy in the wizarding world. No one could claim to follow Voldemort out of reason when monsters like Fenrir were given seats at the table. Voldemort's failure to manage internal discipline further eroded his empire. There was no system of accountability, no evaluations of performance. Yaxley bungled infiltration at the Ministry more than once. Rookwood fed outdated information. Rabastan Lestrange operated in blind loyalty, but often without results. There were no consequences, unless one failed Voldemort directly and publicly. And even then, he would punish with spectacle rather than logic. Torture in front of peers replaced any real evaluation. Mistakes went uncorrected. Knowledge, the cornerstone of any lasting power, was hoarded and feared. His fear of rivals was so absolute that he denied his own followers the tools they needed to succeed. He alone could know the full plan. He alone understood the horcruxes. He sent Snape to spy, but never told him the whole truth. He placed Nagini, his most trusted companion, at the center of his strategy, yet treated her as both pet and soul vessel, risking everything if she were ever destroyed. This paranoia hollowed his leadership from within. No general can win a war if his captains don't know what they're fighting for. The irony of his personnel choices reached its peak during the Battle of Hogwarts. The elite warriors of his army were largely absent or ineffective. The Carrows were disabled by a single professor. Greyback was driven off by students. Lucius and Narcissa defected the moment their son's life became uncertain. The core of his supposed invincible army dissolved under pressure, not because they lacked power, but because they had no faith, no shared vision. They were not soldiers, they were weapons, each unstable in its own way, and all of them pointed in different directions. Voldemort's fixation on bloodlines only made this worse. He refused to consider powerful wizards and witches if their heritage was impure, leaving behind potential allies who could have strengthened his cause. Imagine if he had recruited someone like Kingsley Shacklebolt or even Horace Slughorn under different circumstances, individuals of immense power and insight. But Voldemort's world had no room for nuance. In his court, cruelty mattered more than competence, and lineage mattered more than loyalty. Snape, perhaps his most useful ally, was the one he trusted least. Despite being a master of the dark arts, a potioneer beyond compare, and an invaluable double agent, Snape was never told the truth about Harry's scar, nor the horcruxes, nor the prophecy's second half. Voldemort used Snape as a tool, a pawn who didn't even know the board's dimensions. "You are a clever man, Severus," Voldemort once said, yet his cleverness was feared, not respected. In the end, Voldemort killed the one man whose loyalty was deep and complex, mistaking a chess master for a disposable piece. He recruited children too, Draco Malfoy being the most tragic example. Rather than strengthen his base, he exposed its weakness by entrusting a teenager with the assassination of Dumbledore. This was not strategy. This was a test of fear, a spectacle meant to punish Lucius. The task was impossible, the danger immeasurable, and it backfired spectacularly. Draco was neither ready nor willing, and the mission's failure forced Voldemort to rely on Snape again, deepening a web of distrust that ultimately collapsed under its own weight. Even among his foreign allies, Voldemort failed to build stable coalitions. He relied on magical creatures, giants, dementors, werewolves, beings whose loyalty was tied to short-term gain. Giants followed food, dementors followed despair. There was no long-term vision here, no integration or planning. He used them like blunt tools, and like any tool they broke or turned when mishandled. The dementors ultimately fled, the giants were routed. Their allegiance was as thin as the mist surrounding Azkaban. Voldemort never held councils, he held performances. His followers knelt in circles of fear, not strategy. No one dared speak freely. There was no innovation, no debate. His court was a theatre of pain, where the greatest applause came not from clever ideas, but from displays of cruelty. Bellatrix was rewarded not for victories, but for screams. Pettigrew was spared not for usefulness, but for grovelling. This was not leadership. This was tyranny playing dress-up as destiny. The lack of succession planning also revealed his short-sightedness. What if Voldemort had died in the graveyard during the Triwizard Tournament? What if Harry had struck first? There was no second in command with vision, no lieutenant groomed for continuation. In truth, most of his Death Eaters would have scattered like roaches in light. This alone speaks volumes about the hollowness of his movement. A revolution with no air is not a movement, it is a cult. His cruelty blinded him to loyalty's true face. When Narcissa Malfoy lied about Harry's death in the Forbidden Forest, she did so not out of allegiance to Voldemort, but out of love for her son. Voldemort's greatest moment of perceived triumph, Harry's death, was enabled by a woman who had already betrayed him. This single act, born of maternal instinct, unravelled everything he thought he controlled. And it happened because he never inspired loyalty, only fear. Love, the very thing he scorned, was the instrument of his final deception. Voldemort's choices weren't just foolish, they were self-sabotaging. He empowered the insane, the weak, the vain, and the terrified. He surrounded himself with chaos and called it loyalty. He mistook screaming obedience for structure, and in doing so he ensured his own undoing long before Harry raised a wand in defiance. His empire was built on a foundation of shattered glass, beautiful in its terror, but destined to fall at the first tremor of truth. Number 23, neglecting ancient magic. Lord Voldemort, feared by many, worshipped by few and misunderstood by most, claimed to be the heir of Salazar Slytherin. He paraded this title like a trophy, a justification for his madness and cruelty. And yet, despite his obsession with blood purity and ancient heritage, his actions betrayed a glaring contradiction. He treated ancient magic not as a source of profound power, but as a mere aesthetic. His methods were shallow, rooted in brute force, domination and fear, rather than in wisdom, scholarship, or true understanding of the arcane. The man who boasted of lineage from a founder of Hogwarts never once truly attempted to study or embrace the most mysterious and oldest forms of magic left behind by wizards far greater than himself. Take, for instance, the legend of the Deathly Hallows. Dumbledore, a wizard Voldemort both envied and feared, had delved into that legend not for conquest but for understanding. Voldemort, on the other hand, scoffed at the Resurrection Stone, reducing it to nothing more than a container for a fragment of his soul. He never learned its true identity or its place in the tale of the Peverell brothers. A man so obsessed with defeating death never paused to study the one story in wizarding history that offered a glimpse of how death could be understood and perhaps accepted or manipulated in ways more sophisticated than tearing one's soul to pieces. In the Tales of Beedle the Bard, Hermione discovers the truth about the Hallows through ancient storytelling and runic interpretation. Voldemort had access to much more than a schoolgirl's translated book, yet he never considered exploring the magical folklore that held the key to understanding the deeper layers of life and death. His mind was too narrow, focused on domination and fear. He wanted power, not enlightenment. While he sought immortality, he missed the irony that true wisdom about death had been encoded in the very legends he dismissed as fairy tales. The Department of Mysteries held countless secrets, rooms dedicated to time, love, thought, and death. Voldemort sent others to steal a prophecy, but he never attempted to understand the deeper magic hidden there. Time magic, for example, was left untouched. He never investigated the time room, never sought to master or even experiment with time turners, a tool that allowed control over the most dangerous element in magic. Hermione Granger, still a teenager, managed to use a time turner for academic purposes, and later, in fan lore and speculative accounts, she is imagined as someone who would respect the boundaries of time itself. Voldemort had no such restraint, yet he never even tried. The art of ancient runes was another neglected branch of magic. Ancient runes, revered and respected by those who understood their power, were a language of precision and depth, often used to craft unbreakable enchantments and defenses. Gringotts was protected by runes. Old family vaults used them. Powerful wards around ancient wizarding homes were based on runic systems. Yet Voldemort never crafted any known enchantments that utilized this magic. He relied on brute force, on fear, on serpentine symbols and dark curses. Where was the elegance? Where was the scholarship that a wizard of his alleged intelligence should have pursued? Slytherin's own chamber, hidden beneath Hogwarts for centuries, held a basilisk, a powerful creature, yes, but placed there more as a guardian than as a revelation. Voldemort found the chamber and opened it, but he never explored its depths for knowledge. There were no records of him deciphering carvings, learning from Slytherin's philosophy, or using the chamber for anything other than a platform for murder. If the chamber had scrolls, runes, magical items, or anything of historic importance, Voldemort ignored them all. It was a trophy room to him, not a temple of learning. His obsession with horcruxes reveals his intellectual laziness. Yes, he managed to split his soul multiple times, a grotesque and impressive feat of dark magic. But it was also simplistic, repetitive, and unimaginative. Why did he create 7 horcruxes? Not because he discovered some numerological principle or unearthed an ancient spell suggesting 7 pieces of soul would create invincibility, but because he heard 7 was the most magically powerful number. That's it. No research, no documentation, no exploration of older paths toward transcendence or reincarnation or magical binding, just mutilation and repetition. One would expect a man so bent on immortality to pursue the secrets of alchemy. Nicolas Flamel lived for over 6 centuries using the Philosopher's Stone. Yet Voldemort, who would kill for less, never sought the alchemical path. He didn't study transmutation or delve into the magical theory that gave birth to the stone in the first place. He attempted to steal it as a brute would attempt to rob a bank. It was not knowledge he craved, only the result. The depth of alchemy, the balance between spiritual and material purification, none of it appealed to him. He had no patience for transformation of the self, only for preservation of the self. Even his use of curses reflected his disregard for complexity. The Cruciatus curse, the killing curse, the Imperious curse, these are raw expressions of control and dominance. There is no sophistication in these spells, no art. They are tools for tyrants. Meanwhile, ancient dueling texts describe lost magics, wards that manipulate space, spells that summon illusions from memory, enchantments that harness the environment. But Voldemort reduced his arsenal to 3 unoriginal weapons. He was feared not because he was creative, but because he was cruel and ruthless. The Room of Requirement, a mysterious and ancient artifact of Hogwarts itself, could have been studied and utilized in powerful ways. It reflected intent, transformed according to need, and held the potential for infinite uses. But Voldemort never used it for anything more than hiding one of his horcruxes. He never explored its magical properties, never sought to master its mechanisms or uncover its origin. It was simply a convenient hiding spot, never a subject of wonder or research. Even when he possessed the Elder Wand, he misunderstood its nature. "The wand chooses the wizard," said Ollivander, a truth Voldemort never truly accepted. He thought mastery came through brute conquest. He believed killing Snape would transfer ownership, completely missing the point that the wand responded to loyalty, allegiance, and even respect. Dumbledore had grasped this nuance. Voldemort, for all his cleverness, died without understanding the very weapon in his hand. The irony is brutal. He died holding the wand he thought he controlled, killed by the very boy he underestimated. In The Half-Blood Prince, we see Tom Riddle seeking information from Slughorn, not knowledge, but confirmation of a shortcut. He asked about horcruxes not to understand their origins or implications, but merely to confirm how many pieces one could survive with. He wanted numbers, not insight. Contrast this with Hermione, who, armed only with the resources of the Hogwarts library, taught herself about dangerous magical phenomena, decoding secrets with nothing but persistence and intellect. Voldemort had access to private collections, the Ministry archives, the libraries of fallen pureblood families, yet never bothered to study anything that didn't immediately serve his agenda. The founders of Hogwarts each left behind magical legacies. Ravenclaw's diadem was said to enhance wisdom. It was a symbol of learning and clarity of thought. What did Voldemort do with it? He turned it into a horcrux. He defiled the object instead of using it. He desecrated knowledge instead of honoring it. There's a moment in the books when Harry says, "I think he liked it." He didn't want to just kill it, he wanted to make it dirty. Voldemort did not value wisdom. He sought to dominate it, twist it, prove himself greater by destroying it. Even magical creatures were tools to him. Giants, werewolves, dementors, all were coerced, used, discarded. He never tried to understand the magical balance they represented. Ancient magic often resides in natural forces and creatures. Centaurs, for example, were known for their study of the stars and prophecies. Voldemort never consulted them. He never tried to harness the primal forces of the Forbidden Forest. He never sought wisdom from magical beings. He enslaved them or ignored them. And what of magical artifacts? The wizarding world has artifacts so old and powerful that even the Ministry dares not tamper with them. The Mirror of Erised, for example, showed the deepest desires of the soul. It could have been a tool of introspection or even control, if studied properly. But Voldemort ignored such items. His mind was closed to anything that wasn't immediately deadly. The magical compass of the Founders, the enchanted fountain, the cloak of invisibility, all pieces of a much deeper puzzle he never tried to solve. Grindelwald, for all his cruelty, understood something Voldemort never did, that ideas can change the world. Grindelwald studied the Hallows, experimented with magical theory, and sought to build a new order based on an interpretation of magical destiny. Voldemort scoffed at ideas. He ruled by fear, and fear alone. There was no philosophy in his actions, no magic in his soul, only ambition and a deep, gnawing void he could never fill. Dumbledore said that he never had friends, not because he couldn't make them, but because he didn't value them. And he didn't value knowledge either, not truly. The Forbidden Forest, the veil in the Department of Mysteries, the writings of old prophets, none of these were explored. There were ancient civilizations, magical tribes in Africa, arcane practices in Eastern Europe, enchanted tombs in Egypt. Dumbledore travelled. Voldemort never did. He stayed in England, obsessed with Hogwarts, while the world was wide and full of magical secrets. He was provincial in his tyranny, a warlord with a narrow vision, never a philosopher king. There's a lesson in this. Voldemort, for all his terror, was ultimately limited, not by the world, but by his refusal to truly explore it. He rejected friendship, love, and trust, yes, but he also rejected wonder, discovery, and the pursuit of true, magical excellence. He feared death, but refused to learn from those who faced it. He craved power, but refused to seek wisdom. In doing so, he ensured his own downfall, not because Harry was more powerful, but because Voldemort chose to remain willfully ignorant of the very things that made magic worth mastering. Number 24, loud and proud, takeover of the Ministry. The day Voldemort took the Ministry of Magic was not one of stealth or subtlety. It was a display of brute force, a cold, calculated storm cloaked in smoke and screams. The once thrumming heart of wizarding governance, with its polished halls and labyrinthine bureaucracy, was turned into a haunted shell almost overnight. To the average witch or wizard, the transition from Scrimgeour's firm hand to the Death Eater's iron grip felt like an earthquake, sudden, disorienting, terrifying. But behind the shock and fear, a quieter truth stood. This conquest, as mighty as it seemed, bore the seeds of its own collapse. In taking the Ministry so violently, Voldemort made a choice that defied all sense of strategy and logic. He discarded the silent path of influence for a throne made of shattered laws and broken institutions. The fall began with whispers, then with disappearances. In July of 1997, the world learned that Rufus Scrimgeour had been killed. His death was announced as a loss due to illness, but everyone knew the lie. Voldemort's followers replaced him with Pius Thicknesser, a puppet placed under the Imperious curse. On paper, the government remained intact. In practice, it had become a playground for tyranny, but rather than preserving the illusion of legitimacy, Voldemort allowed the decay to show. He wanted it to show. Officials who didn't cooperate vanished. Departments were purged, notably the Muggle-born Registration Commission, created to interrogate and imprison innocent witches and wizards based on blood status. Even Dolores Umbridge, who once thrived in the Ministry's darkest corners, became a willing cog in this machine. Yet this was not strength, this was spectacle, and spectacle invites resistance. What makes Voldemort's approach so bewildering is how utterly unnecessary this theatrical brutality was. The Ministry, a famously sluggish and self-preserving organism, could have been conquered from within. Its employees were risk-averse, rule-bound, and terrified of upheaval. It would have taken little more than carefully planted misinformation, bribery, and subtle manipulation to rot it from the inside out. Had Voldemort placed trusted followers into key roles gradually, perhaps someone like Yaxley in magical law enforcement, or Travers in the Department of Mysteries, he could have turned the Ministry into his tool without raising alarms. Bureaucracy would have disguised the tyranny, giving the illusion of continuity while poisoning every channel. Instead, Voldemort chose fire. He allowed the world to see the transformation, to feel the chill of his shadow fall across every institution. The Daily Prophet, once a flawed but functioning newspaper, was reduced to propaganda. Undesirable number 1 became Harry Potter's official designation, and every page carried images of wanted wizards, missing persons, and vague threats. The effectiveness of the press was annihilated, and with it, public trust. In destroying the press, Voldemort cut off his own mouthpiece to the public. There was no attempt to co-opt public opinion, only to dominate it, and dominance without persuasion breeds unrest. Even inside the Ministry, the terror created fissures. Percy Weasley, once loyal to protocol above all, disappeared from the building and joined the resistance. Kingsley Shacklebolt, who had been operating as an aura and secret member of the Order of the Phoenix, vanished into the underground and began helping others escape. It was not long before entire floors of the Ministry, like the Department of Magical Games and Sports, were ghost towns, either emptied or filled with trembling workers. Loyalty could not be coerced from fear for long. When Pius Thickness issued orders, people followed not out of respect but out of dread. This created mistakes, hesitations, and, in time, sabotage. There is a fundamental flaw in Voldemort's psychology that became catastrophic here. He believed that fear was the most efficient tool. To him, love, compassion, and trust were weaknesses, not resources. He did not understand how a government functioned beyond the throne. He did not grasp that institutions are made of people, and people must believe in something larger than terror to keep systems running. The flu networks, the apparition wards, the magical contracts and legal offices all began to falter under the weight of disillusioned staff. Every government needs oil in its gears. Voldemort poured sand instead. The most damning example came when Harry, Ron, and Hermione infiltrated the Ministry in September of 1997 to retrieve the locket Horcrux from Umbridge. By then, Voldemort's grip was tight. Yet 3 teenagers managed to walk in wearing disguises, access restricted floors, locate the artifact, and escape. No alarms, no coordinated defense. A Ministry ruled by fear is not one that breeds diligence. Even Umbridge, fanatical and cruel, was more concerned with torturing Muggle-borns than maintaining actual security. Voldemort had taken control, but the structure he built was hollow. It was a castle made of ice beneath a rising sun. Yaxley, Runcorn, and the other loyalists filled powerful positions, but their allegiance was brittle. These were not men who believed in the cause, they believed in survival. The moment that balance tipped, they would flee, and Voldemort had no way to inspire more than obedience. He had killed the symbol of hope in Scrimgeour, but he failed to replace it with something sustainable. The Ministry didn't become a new order, it became a hostage. Contrast this with the quiet, insidious way Tom Riddle once manipulated his way into power at Hogwarts. As a student, he learned the secret passages, the personalities of his professors, the weaknesses of the system. He opened the Chamber of Secrets without being caught. He framed others, erased memories, and built a mythos around his name. That was brilliance. That was subtlety. But the older Voldemort became, the more he abandoned the very tools that once made him dangerous. He lost his patience, his tact, and most damning of all, his understanding of human nature. When he walked into the Ministry and planted his flag, he didn't just announce a new regime, he announced open war. He removed the veil, ensuring that every hidden rebel knew exactly who the enemy was. There would be no negotiations, no illusions, only oppression. This galvanized the resistance. The Order of the Phoenix grew stronger, more focused. Underground safe houses sprang up. Radio broadcasts like Potterwatch emerged, countering the propaganda and rekindling faith. Voldemort's own heavy-handedness had created the rebellion he feared. He did not realize that control is not maintained through fear alone. It must be paired with belief. Had he allowed the Ministry to function with just enough semblance of normalcy, people might have adapted. A government cloaked in darkness but operating with mundane efficiency is more dangerous than an overt dictatorship. The latter inspires revolt. The former instills resignation. Voldemort could have become a mythic background force, the hand behind every decree. Instead, he painted a target on himself. And then there were the contradictions. The Death Eaters were given unchecked authority, but without discipline or unity. Some, like Fenrir Greyback, were unleashed upon the public not to enforce order, but to indulge in savagery. This wasn't leadership, it was chaos masquerading as structure. When chaos takes root in the center of power, collapse is inevitable. Even Lucius Malfoy, once one of Voldemort's closest allies, began to falter, terrified of losing his son to the monster he had once served. Narcissa lied to Voldemort at the Battle of Hogwarts to protect Draco. That betrayal was seeded the moment Voldemort chose fear over loyalty. The symbolic power of the Ministry could have been immense if wielded carefully. Its archives, its control over magical lore, its reach into every corner of British wizarding life. These were tools of governance, not just weapons. Instead, they were corrupted, twisted into instruments of paranoia. The Wizengamot was dissolved, the Department of Mysteries remained eerily untouched, its secrets left unused. Why? Because Voldemort didn't care about the machinery of power. He wanted the throne, not the engine. His obsession with Harry Potter warped every decision. Instead of consolidating rule and stabilizing his grip, he chased shadows, dreams, and prophecies. Every decree issued from the Ministry had the scent of vengeance, not governance. A rational dictator would have used the Ministry's resources to seek out the horcruxes, to destroy dissent before it bloomed. Voldemort, blinded by ego, turned the full weight of his stolen empire toward one teenager. The irony? It was this obsession that allowed Harry to slip through the cracks again and again. At Malfoy Manor, when Voldemort learned of the break-in at Gringotts, he panicked. They have found the horcrux, he realized. His anger was not that the Ministry had failed to protect the system. It was that his secret had been exposed. He had never intended to use the Ministry as anything more than a stage for domination. He didn't understand that a kingdom of fear is built on rotting foundations. By the time the Battle of Hogwarts arrived, Voldemort was not a ruler. He was a fugitive wearing a crown. The Ministry had become irrelevant, its role in society reduced to ash. People no longer turned to it for leadership. They turned to one another. And in that final hour, as students, professors, and ordinary citizens stood against the Dark Lord, it became clear. Voldemort had not built an empire. He had built a rebellion. His fatal flaw was not cruelty or arrogance. It was short-sightedness. In destroying the Ministry, he destroyed the very stage upon which power could be maintained. He ruled through dread, but dread is fleeting. Hope, however fragile, survives. The proof lies in the ruins he left behind, ruins that became fertile ground for renewal, not despair. Number 25. Ruling by fear alone. Voldemort was a master of fear, but not of wisdom. When he returned to power, he built his regime not on loyalty, vision, or even manipulation, but on terror alone. And terror, while powerful in the short term, is one of the most unstable foundations a ruler can choose. Throughout wizarding history, even tyrants like Salazar Slytherin or Gellert Grindelwald had a vision that went beyond the wand. They knew that fear was only one tool in a wider arsenal. But Voldemort, consumed by his own bitterness and obsession with purity, failed to understand this basic truth. He ruled not with promises, but with punishments. He never once tried to convince the population of the merits of his ideology. Instead of forming an appealing narrative, order, power, the return of pure wizarding culture, he reduced his campaign to one slogan: death to Muggleborns. That was his vision. It offered nothing to the average witch or wizard except the hollow chance of survival, provided they obeyed. No security, no future, no sense of collective purpose, just darkness. Even his inner circle, the Death Eaters, followed him more out of fear or ambition than genuine belief. Lucius Malfoy, for instance, was stripped of power and degraded the moment he showed weakness, revealing how quickly Voldemort turned on those who faltered. This obsession with punishment above all else reached a peak during the Ministry's fall. Voldemort did not reform the institution to make it more efficient. He did not restructure wizarding law to reflect a new vision. He simply turned it into a machine of oppression. The Muggle-born Registration Commission, presided over by Dolores Umbridge, existed solely to persecute. There was no attempt to justify this to the wider public in any believable way. The regime did not even pretend to offer peace or justice. The lies were thin and unconvincing. Even during the trials, when innocent witches and wizards were accused of stealing magic, the proceedings were so overtly cruel that they became spectacles of fear rather than tools of persuasion. During the Second Wizarding War, Voldemort had a golden opportunity. He could have promised the wizarding world a return to stability after the chaos that followed the First War. He could have offered economic recovery, protection from Muggle technology, or empowerment of pure-blood families through legal reforms. Instead, he offered only the same brutal message over and over. He punished those who hesitated, he executed dissenters, he mocked the dead, and ruled from the shadows. This was not governance, it was prolonged assassination. His use of fear backfired even in combat strategy. When he placed the dark mark above houses to terrify witnesses, it served only to galvanize opposition. People realized they were being hunted, and fear turned into rage. The Order of the Phoenix, though smaller and far less equipped, had something Voldemort lacked: purpose. As Dumbledore once said, "You are protected, in short, by your ability to love." Love gave the resistance a strength Voldemort's army never understood. When people believe in something greater than themselves, they become more dangerous than any army of thugs. Voldemort never inspired belief, only terror, and terror turns to ashes when the fire is hot enough. Even his takeover of Hogwarts missed the point. A school is a cradle of ideology. Grindelwald understood that. He recruited through persuasion, charisma, and the promise of change. Voldemort instead installed Severus Snape as headmaster and allowed the Carrows to torture children into submission. Rather than winning over young hearts, he created a generation of students who would never forget the pain he inflicted. Neville Longbottom, once shy and hesitant, became a warrior not because of inspiration from the Death Eaters, but in resistance to them. Hogwarts became a crucible of resistance, not compliance. The fear Voldemort relied on was not only unstable, it was predictable. The moment he killed Harry in the Forbidden Forest, he expected the resistance to collapse. Instead, their grief transformed into defiance. In that moment, the fear he had cultivated for years dissolved. "I don't want anyone else to try to help," Harry had said before walking into the forest, and that sacrifice ignited a kind of moral fire the Dark Lord could never understand. For all his power, Voldemort failed to see the human heart. He saw only weakness where there was strength. He confused silence for obedience and trembling for loyalty. He could have learned from history. Even Muggle tyrants knew better. The Roman emperors used bread and circuses. Modern dictators wrap themselves in the language of destiny. Dumbledore, with all his flaws, always spoke of the greater good. But Voldemort made no such effort. Even his speeches lacked rhetoric. He barked commands. He made threats. He never inspired, only coerced. His rise was meteoric because of the vacuum of fear after Dumbledore's death, but his fall was just as swift because once people have nothing left to lose, fear ceases to work. At Malfoy Manor, we saw the fear take root and rot. Narcissa Malfoy, once loyal by marriage, lied to Voldemort's face to protect her son. Bellatrix Lestrange, the most fanatical of his followers, began to lose composure when her power was questioned. Draco, coerced into being a Death Eater, never became the killer Voldemort hoped for. His rule twisted loyalty into treason. Parents turned on their children, husbands betrayed wives. This was not a regime, it was decay. There was no Death Star in Voldemort's empire, no central symbol of strength. Even Nagini, his most trusted companion, was a snake, a creature that inspires fear, not loyalty. The symbolism mattered. Fearsome rulers often build monuments to their greatness. Voldemort lived in ruins. He lived in the dark. He hid in forests, in dungeons, in the shadows of others' homes. He was never proud enough to offer the world a new dawn, only endless night. And yet, the greatest irony is that Voldemort himself feared death more than anything. He who wielded fear as a weapon was ruled by it. "There is nothing worse than death," he declared. But that belief was his downfall. In denying the finality of life, he rejected the essence of humanity. Dumbledore understood that to die is to live honestly. Voldemort saw it as defeat. His horcruxes were not symbols of vision but of cowardice. In seeking immortality, he forfeited legacy. His vision, or lack thereof, was so shallow that it failed even to tempt the ambitious. Tom Riddle, as a student, had the potential to charm, to lead, to seduce the minds of the brilliant. But Voldemort, the self-fashioned Dark Lord, became a creature of repetition. He said the same things, he made the same threats. He believed in only one lever of power, fear, no new ideology, no new symbols, no movement, only slaughter. In the end, even his followers feared each other more than their enemies. The Snatchers stole from the weak. The werewolves, led by Fenrir Greyback, were promised chaos but got only blood. The giants were manipulated with vague promises. These were not alliances. They were fragile arrangements held together by intimidation. The second Voldemort fell, the entire structure crumbled. By contrast, the resistance had many voices: Lupin, McGonagall, Kingsley Shacklebolt, and Arthur Weasley. They all stood for different things, but they stood together. Their disagreements made them stronger, not weaker. Voldemort tolerated no dissent. His lieutenants trembled before him, not out of love or belief, but fear of his wrath, and that fear made them brittle. The night of the Battle of Hogwarts should have been Voldemort's triumph. He had the numbers, the momentum, and the advantage. But his fatal error was in assuming that killing Harry would break their spirit. Instead, it set fire to it. The defenders of the castle rose like phoenixes from the ashes. Even the house elves joined the fight. This was not the victory of arms, but of will. Voldemort misunderstood that completely. He punished failure but never rewarded loyalty. He destroyed the Malfoys' status. He humiliated his followers. He killed his own horcruxes by accident because he trusted no one enough to share his secrets. His downfall was written not in prophecy, but in the very logic of his methods. Fear demands constant feeding. The moment it falters, it vanishes. But belief, true belief, endures. There were no songs sung for Voldemort, no statues, no children named after him in secret. He left no lasting legacy except pain and rubble. Even his name, once feared, became a cautionary tale. Fear of a name increases fear of the thing itself, Hermione once said. And after his fall, people began to say it again, not out of dread, but to rob it of power. His empire was so hollow that even his memory could be erased by courage. In his obsession with blood purity, Voldemort also betrayed the very people he claimed to champion. The pure blood families were not elevated. They were endangered. The wizarding world did not thrive under his rule. It withered. Shops closed. Children disappeared. Fear choked commerce, culture, and education. He did not lead a nation. He stalked it. When he walked through the grounds of Hogwarts with Harry's body in his arms, expecting surrender, he was greeted by defiance. In that moment, Voldemort finally saw what he had never understood. Fear controls bodies but not souls, and when people refuse to surrender their souls, no magic, no curse, no snake can rule them. The greatest failure of Voldemort was not his arrogance, his cruelty, or his obsession with bloodlines. It was his belief that fear was stronger than hope. That domination was greater than inspiration, and that control could replace conviction. But the history of both wizards and muggles teaches us the same lesson again and again. Those who lead by fear always fall, because in the end, people will risk everything for the one thing Voldemort never offered: freedom. Number 26. Ignoring Hogwarts as a strategic fortress. Of all the inexplicable decisions Voldemort made during his rise to power, perhaps the most baffling one was his refusal to claim Hogwarts as a strategic stronghold. The ancient school, steeped in centuries of magical energy, built atop powerful ley lines brimming with arcane defenses and dark secrets, should have been the centerpiece of his empire. Yet for reasons that defy logic, Voldemort turned his back on it until it was far too late. This wasn't merely an oversight, it was a critical failure, a testament to his own blindness, arrogance, and detachment from what made power sustainable. Hogwarts was not just a school, it was a fortress, a sanctuary of spells, wards, and ancient knowledge that even Dumbledore barely began to unearth. It held secrets older than the Ministry itself, created by founders whose magical prowess surpassed anything modern wizards could replicate. And yet for most of the series, Voldemort treated it like a quaint little school, rather than what it was, the heart of magical Britain. Voldemort had every reason, every opportunity, and every connection to make Hogwarts his own. He was a descendant of Salazar Slytherin, and the school recognized that bloodline. The Chamber of Secrets responded to him. The basilisk, sleeping beneath its floors, obeyed him. There was no magical institution that would have been more inclined to yield to his will, yet he chose to ignore it for over a decade. Even after his return in Goblet of Fire, when he once again walked in physical form and had the support of his Death Eaters, he allowed Dumbledore to remain as headmaster, did not contest the Ministry's influence over the school, and did not attempt to secure it until Deathly Hallows, and even then, only when it was too late to make any meaningful strategic gain. He used spies like Severus Snape, yet never thought to install a deeper network of influence within the school itself. He permitted Dolores Umbridge, a Ministry pawn, to impose authority over Hogwarts, not as a loyal supporter of his, but as a bureaucrat enforcing Cornelius Fudge's paranoia. This suggests Voldemort had no plan for Hogwarts during the critical years when he was quietly regaining strength. He didn't manipulate the infrastructure of the school, nor did he plant curses or enchantments that could later help him seize control. When the final battle came, Hogwarts stood almost entirely as it had been, full of hidden passages and defensive magic that Voldemort's forces were unprepared to confront. What makes this more confusing is that Voldemort knew the school well. As Tom Riddle, he was a model student, brilliant, manipulative, curious beyond measure. He discovered the Chamber of Secrets, learned the truth about his heritage, and even committed murder within its walls. He charmed teachers, fooled the headmaster, and explored the school more deeply than most students ever dared. The Room of Requirement, the Forbidden Forest, the hidden passageways behind mirrors and statues, these were places he had access to, yet never returned to reclaim. He didn't even attempt to weaponize the castle's deeper magical properties. His knowledge could have unlocked so much potential, yet he dismissed it. The Room of Requirement alone could have been an invaluable tool. As Dobby once explained, sometimes it is there and sometimes it is not, but when it appears it is always equipped for the seeker's needs. During the events of Half-Blood Prince, Draco Malfoy used the room to smuggle Death Eaters into the castle. That feat alone should have proven to Voldemort how malleable and dangerous the room was. If Malfoy, a sixth-year student, could exploit the school's defenses to this extent, what might Voldemort have done with full knowledge and intent? And yet he never claimed it. He never ordered its destruction. He didn't even try to understand how it might be turned against him. This absence of strategic thinking is all the more glaring considering his obsession with ancient magic. Voldemort feared what he did not understand. His downfall began with the prophecy and culminated in the magical protections that Lily Potter's love invoked. One would think that such a man, so haunted by old magic, so afraid of forces beyond his control, would seek out every ancient magical structure in Britain and bend it to his will. Hogwarts was the pinnacle of that kind of magic. Its founders created defenses more enduring than the Ministry's, more mysterious than the Department of Mysteries itself. But instead of making Hogwarts the seat of his dominion, Voldemort allowed it to remain a beacon of resistance. Even when he finally did move on the school in Deathly Hallows, it wasn't a well-executed siege, it was a blunt assault, a chaotic rush. "The castle is strong," Gonagall declared. "The grounds are protected." And indeed they were. From enchanted statues to stone knights, from the defenders atop the towers to the enchantments placed by generations of headmasters, Hogwarts repelled an army. And where was Voldemort? Sitting in the Forbidden Forest, waiting, giving speeches, offering mercy, hoping someone would hand Harry Potter over. It was desperation, not strategy. He had let the school become the stronghold of the opposition, and in doing so, he sealed his fate. Voldemort's failure to act earlier reveals something important about his character. He did not understand loyalty, nor did he understand the symbolism of Hogwarts. To generations of witches and wizards, the castle was not merely a school, but a place of identity, belonging, and refuge. That was why the resistance gathered there. That was why students refused to flee. Even when they faced certain death, they returned. Neville Longbottom, beaten and hunted, remained behind, keeping the fire of rebellion alive. The Room of Requirement became their home, their sanctuary. If Voldemort had claimed Hogwarts early, he would have crushed that spirit before it had a chance to rise. His obsession with the Ministry of Magic only adds to the absurdity. The Ministry, while symbolically powerful, was never a secure fortress. It was bureaucratic, vulnerable to internal betrayal, and lacked the ancient enchantments that protected Hogwarts. Yet Voldemort spent months infiltrating it, assassinating Scrimgeour, and installing puppet ministers. It was an unstable, constantly shifting seat of control. Contrast that with Hogwarts, immovable, immortal, steeped in protections even the Dark Lord feared. In placing his priorities in London, Voldemort revealed his fixation with political power over magical supremacy, a miscalculation that Dumbledore from beyond the grave had foreseen. Dumbledore himself once said, "You place too much importance on the so-called purity of blood. You fail to recognize that it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be." This was not only a lesson in morality, but also a warning about strategy. Voldemort saw Hogwarts as a place of youth, of students and teachers, rather than a living structure with ancient roots and purpose. He saw no threat there because he did not believe those within it had power worth fearing. His disdain for Hogwarts mirrored his disdain for humanity, his failure to understand that even the smallest light can ignite a blaze. Consider also the symbolism of the school's four houses. Slytherin, his own lineage, was present in every corridor. He could have built a cult of blood purity within its ranks, yet he never returned as a leader or prophet. Ravenclaw, with its devotion to wit and knowledge, could have been seduced with promises of forbidden magic. Hufflepuff's loyalty might have been manipulated into obedience through charm and flattery. Gryffindor, the house he loathed, could have been dismantled from within. But Voldemort waged no cultural war on Hogwarts. He left it to its own devices until its students became an army. Even Snape, a man he trusted more than most, did not receive a clear directive to weaponize the school. Appointing him headmaster was a political move, not a magical one. Snape, caught between loyalties, could not dismantle the school's defenses or transform it into a fortress for the Dark Lord. By the time Snape died, Hogwarts had already begun to revolt. The ghosts, the house elves, the paintings, they all remembered who the true masters of the castle were. Their resistance, though subtle, was critical. Voldemort thought fear could conquer all. Hogwarts proved him wrong.